Before I get into this sermon, I believe in giving people a heads up. And yes, a heads up about this sermon and about a trigger warning accompanying it, but also a heads up that this is my second to last sermon with this congregation. My last sermon will be June 30th. So if you want to make sure you catch that, that's the time to do so. Okay? We all on the same page? All right. If you're having trouble seeing the screen, you're going to want to move to where you can see the screen just for the beginning part of this. And you're welcome to come hang out on the steps real quick, as long as you can see that. You'll be good to go. But there's about to be a lot of text on the screen. All right? If you have trouble reading this, for whatever reason, please ask the person next to you to whisper it quietly to you. You can always tell who the fast readers are. Next one. This next one has a swear word in it. And finally, all right, so I'm glad you were laughing. Because I'm going to ask you to imagine something for a minute. I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're at a table with 3 of your friends, and all of your friends are female, and you're a woman. That part's important. I want you to imagine that real quick, okay? 4 people sitting around a table, very Sex in the City, happy hour-esque kind of thing. So you're talking about weddings and your friends and boy bands, and one of your friends mentions that she's just quit her job and started a new one. And you ask, why? Because you know that she had loved her accounting job, tax department. And she said, well, the sexism had just gotten really bad. She said, they were having me do the work of 2.5 jobs. And when I would bring it up to them that this was maybe not okay, they would tell me that I just needed to work harder, or that, okay, yes, we can hire someone else, but we're gonna have to cut your pay. And I was the only woman working in that department, and I was the only person they did this to. She said there are a bunch of other things, but that was really what made me decide to change. And she goes on to say, she says, you know, it was really interesting because I would go to these job interviews, and when I was talking with women interviewers, they would ask me, well, why are you transferring jobs? And she said, oh, I would say that I was looking for a cultural change. And the women would all kind of smile and nod and move on to the next question. She said, we all know, even when we're not actually saying it. The sexism is so bad that we all know what we're talking about, and yet we can't actually talk about it. And so all the women know. We all know. Even when we're talking in code, we all know. And we talk in code most of the time because when we actually talk about it, when we really actually talk about it, we get dismissed. Or told that it was a one-time thing, or there must be something that we missed, or it couldn't have possibly happened that way, or why didn't we do something differently about it? And so we talk in code almost all the time. And that won't work for a sermon, because a sermon isn't just to women. A sermon is to men too. And generally, men don't understand our code. And when I was trying to put together this sermon, I was really struggling because I really want the women and the allies to have someone that they can see up here not talking in code, really saying the real truth about what is happening and how we feel about it and what it does to the women in the congregation and to the women in the world, and how it hurts all of us, how it hurts every single one of us. And frankly, I don't know how to talk about that without risking people being hurt. Because this stuff is painful. Because this stuff is hurtful. Because it is hurtful to the women and it's hurtful to the men. And I think we have to talk about it. I think even though it might be hurtful, even though it might be hard, we have to talk about it without pulling any punches, so that finally, for once, we all have the opportunity to be on the same page. And it doesn't have to be hurtful. If you hear the things I say today and you're feeling a resistance to them or you're feeling hurt by them, you can choose to feel them with curiosity instead. You can choose to feel them with wonder. You can choose to feel them with commitment and determination to do something different. It doesn't have to be painful in this moment. I was talking with one of our congregants earlier this week, and we started talking about the check boxes, right? The boxes that you can check that let you know you're not actually sexist. I mean, it applies to racism and homophobia and all that too, but today we're talking about sexism. And so the check boxes that let you know you're a good person, right? Because our society equates being sexist with being a bad person and being not sexist with being a good person, as if that's a real dichotomy. And so we hold on to these qualifications that we have that make us different from the bad people, that make it so we couldn't possibly be that bad person, right? I do this. I'm a woman. I can't possibly be sexist. I'm a feminist. I can't possibly be sexist. Right? Those are two of the check boxes. If you're a woman, if you're a feminist. Feminist, of course, has all these little check boxes underneath it. I am pro-choice. I believe in the wage gap and I think it should be ended. I went to the Women's March. I'm a feminist. I can't possibly be sexist. There are other check boxes. If you work in social justice in any way, shape, or form, then, right, you understand oppression. And you know what it's like. And so there's no way that you would perpetuate oppression against anyone else ever. If you grew up with a woman in your life that you cared about, a mother or a sister or an aunt, maybe you even had conversations with that person where they shared with you how difficult it was, some sort of Me Too story of their own, or the violence they have received at the hands of a man. Maybe you felt honored to receive that story and you handled it really well, right? Checkbox. I can't possibly be sexist. What about this person I care about? And then, finally, I think the biggest and the most harmful one, being a good person. They're a good person in the community. They're generous, they're kind, they show up, they're here, they make me laugh. They're a good person. They couldn't possibly be sexist. And of course, we know that these checkboxes are BS. That you can be all of those things. You can be a woman who is a feminist, who is a social justice worker, who has a lot of women in their life, and who is a good person in their community, and still perpetuate sexism. Because it's the air that we breathe. It's the land that we walk on. It's the society we're raised up in. It's the TV, it's the movies, it's the magazines. It's everywhere. It's in 3-year-olds thinking that boys can't wear dresses. 3-year-olds. So if 3-year-olds have absorbed it to that extent, how much have we absorbed it? I want to give you an example of exactly how wrong the checkboxes are. And this is the one major Me Too story. Heads up, right? And I need to preface it by saying that I have healed. That I have talked to a therapist, that this is far from the worst thing to happen to most women, and I am doing just fine. And a few years ago, I had a friend in New York City. This is a friend I knew from camp. I've known him my whole life. My family knew his family. My parents knew his parents. He was a feminist. He was a liberal, right? He was a lawyer, which wasn't in the checkboxes I mentioned before, but I think is important to this story. And he happened to live right across from my new job. And my new job was about an hour and a half commute for me, and I needed to be there early in the morning. So I had this bright idea. I said, hey, what if I come down and spend the night in your apartment, and then I can just walk across the street to my new job in the morning? Then I'll save myself having to get up at 5 a.m. to make it to this new job. And he said, yeah, sure, that's fine. I have the couch you can stay on, or we've known each other for forever. If you want to stay in my bed, we can do that. No touching, nothing has to happen. It'll be all right. I said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. I'll come on down. Because he fit all these check boxes. He, of all people, should have known, right? And yet, I still woke up in the middle of the night to him touching me in ways that I had not consented to. Check boxes are wrong. You can have all the check boxes in the world, but when the air that we breathe and live in is so filled with an unconscious bias, when we're so habituated to behaving and thinking in a certain way, when push comes to shove, we behave the way we've been taught. And speaking of checkboxes, I went home and I was convinced that it was my fault because of the checkboxes that I fit. I am a strong woman. I am capable. I've got a community of support around me. So if this happened to me, it had to have been that I miscommunicated or I communicated something incorrectly because I had these checkboxes that I was holding on to. But the checkboxes are wrong. The checkboxes are so wrong, and they're wrong in our denomination. Unitarian Universalists have a tendency to tell themselves, we had the first ordained female minister. We can't possibly be sexist. We still ordain an unprecedented number of women clergy. We can't possibly be sexist. We had a female minister at this church. We can't possibly be sexist. but I have seen things happen in this church that remind me of the times in my life where my autonomy and who I am as a person has not been respected, where my boundaries have been crossed. Moments like, in my first couple of days here, I was at a party, and I was having a conversation with a woman, and I took 2 lemon squares to put onto my plate. And this woman looked at my lemon squares and looked at me and said, it's a good thing you're going to be biking to work every day. Several months later, I gave a sermon. I was standing in the receiving line. An older leader, white man in the church came up to me. Nicely done. Good job on the sermon. And you're so pretty to look at. As he touched my face. A few weeks later, another white man. Didn't touch my face, but did touch me. And said, I love watching you preach. You're so beautiful. They like watching me preach because I'm so pretty. A few months ago, I was standing in the office and there were some women in there and they needed a box moved. And they said, we better get a man to move this. So they went and they found, he must have been in his 70s, year-old man, to move this box. And he was kind of struggling with it. And so I just went over and picked up the box and moved it because it really wasn't that heavy. And I don't think that these women looked at me and said, oh, Robin can't move this. She's a woman. I think it's just totally in their heads that when you need something heavy moved, you get a man to move it, even if he's 70.
Hey, we 70-year-olds can still move boxes.
Where were you on that day, sir? Where were you? Those are the one-on-one examples. But there are communal examples as well. When I've been sitting in meetings, and the meetings are mostly women with a couple of men, and yet the men are talking the most and the most often. When there's a group of people who need to get something done, and the men come to the meetings and contribute their ideas, and yet when the tasks are being handed out, somehow the women end up with all of the things that actually need to be done. And then, a few weeks ago, we had a meeting here in this sanctuary where I saw some older white men dominate the meeting with their opinions and with what they thought should happen. And they dominated it to the point, right? They didn't just get up and say what they thought and then let it rest. They needed the congregation to take an action on it, even when the congregation very clearly was not interested in taking action on it. They did this repeatedly, putting their own wants and needs ahead of the well-being of the congregation. Now keep in mind, I have healed. I have several years of seminary and therapy to help me process all my emotions and all the things that have happened to me and continue on with my life. There are women in this congregation for whom that is not true. How do you think they feel when they see things like that happen? Or when they have things like that happen to them? How do you think someone in this congregation feels when they see that happen and they have had violence perpetrated against them by a man within the last year? And if you think that doesn't happen to people in our congregation, you are wrong. There are absolutely people in this sanctuary right now who have had violence perpetrated against them in the last 12 months. So, you know what? No, actually, I am not okay. I am not okay because this is not okay. Because the way that we are behaving and the way that we are treating each other is not okay. This is not right. This is not how we behave in beloved community. This is not how we interact with each other. This is not how we love one another well. And if you are okay with these things I have mentioned, that might be something to look at, because it is not okay, and we need to fix it. We have to fix this. Church is the place we come to practice. And if this is what's happening just inside of this church, imagine what's happening out there. Right? I gave you, just in this sermon, 9 examples of sexism in the church and in the outside world. 9. In most sermons, when I'm trying to make a point, I give 2. But I gave 9 because I know that there are people who are going to dismiss what I say. Because I know there are people who need 9 examples for it to permeate through to their heart. And so we gotta fix this, because this isn't fair, and this isn't right, and it's not okay. Now, I always get really frustrated when ministers stand up here and give some big, wide ideological idea and then say, we must fix this, and give absolutely no ways for how to actually fix it. So let's give some actual ways for how to actually fix this. Number 1, be aware. This means being aware of your thoughts. This means thinking through what you're going to say before you say it. This means thinking, would I say this to someone of the opposite gender, male or female? Would I say this to someone of the opposite gender? This is thinking through, if I knew that this person had been deeply hurt yesterday, would I say this thing to them? This is thinking through, who's in the room with me? And what do I need to keep in mind for them? This is so important. And it's really tied to what can be done in like a don't apologize kind of way, right? Most of the time, a meaningless apology actually does more harm than good. Being aware and changing your behavior based on that, that's what's going to make the difference. That's what real amends look like. Okay? Paying attention when you're in public. Who's in line with you at the grocery store? What genders are they? Pay attention to the person who's checking people out. What gender are they? And what do you notice about behaviors based on that? Paying attention. Oh, great little thing to do with this, right? When you're walking down a crowded street, don't change your behavior at all. Just pay attention to who moves out of your way and whose way you move out of. When I did this in New York last year, I discovered that white men never moved out of my way, pretty much. Right? Like 1 or 2 maybe would, but large majority, they never moved out of my way. Black men moved out of my way sometimes. It was about 50-50. White women, about 50-50. Black women, always moved out of my way. So pay attention to that, right? Don't change your behavior, not in the beginning. Just pay attention and see what you can learn from that. Maybe it'll be different for you. California might be totally different from New York, but try it and find out. It's not, people say. Listen. Really listen. Listen to people when they're talking. I've been in churches where they made this really concrete in meetings. So when you started a meeting, for the first 5 minutes, only Black women talked. For the second 5 minutes, only women talked. For the third 5 minutes, only women and Black men talked. And then white men were allowed to start talking. Now, you don't need to go that far if you don't want to. Great if you did. But you can do this for yourself, right? It doesn't have to be a rule for you to do it. In a meeting, you can start timing and be like, all right, I'm not going to talk for the first at least 5 minutes on any given subject. And then, you might be in a meeting where there's someone else who doesn't know this and they're totally dominating the beginning of the meeting, but at least that person won't be you. You can let that be someone else, right? You can stay silent. You can listen, because you might be surprised at what kind of good ideas really come up from the people that society has told they need to be silent. Some people need time to gather their thoughts and the courage to speak up in settings like that. So give them that time. Number 4, ask, especially before you touch. And I can't believe I have to say this, but don't touch people's faces without their permission, all right? It seems like a pretty simple, basic one that I think we can all agree on. And it still goes farther, right? Don't touch people on their shoulder unless you have permission. Don't touch their belly. Definitely don't touch their back. One of my friends in seminary, she was having a backache, and she was trying to describe where it was. And so she said, it's that place where men put their hands on your back when they're trying to pretend they're not being creepy. But actually, they kind of are. And everyone knew where she meant. They all said, oh yeah, right there. Yeah. And they laughed and then got real silent. Because we all know, right? All the women know. So don't touch someone unless you have permission first, okay? And then finally, agape, love. Really love the people in this congregation and the people that you meet. Keep in mind, 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted or raped in their lifetime. That's the statistic, and it is almost certainly deeply underreported. There are so many people who have been sexually assaulted or raped, and there are even more who have seen or been part of a domestic violence situation. When you add those numbers up, it's a lot of people who have gone through a lot of pain. So keep that in mind when you're talking. Keep that in mind when you're interacting with one another. And love each other through that. Love each other like you got hurt yesterday, because some people did. Because some people haven't had the chance to heal. And they're still in pain. So love them like they are. And love yourself like you deserve all the healing in the world. Love yourself like how could anyone ever tell you you are anything less than beautiful and amazing and wonderful. We all know. Now, we all know. And so we can do something about it. And honestly, we can do something about it in joy. Yes, this sermon had some hard things that we talked about. So let's go forth into the world on a good note.